Within the walls of Harrow House, two daughters breathed the same air, yet inhabited entirely separate worlds. Lady Cecilia Marigold Harrow possessed the kind of luminescence that made poets stumble over their verses and young men forget their manners entirely. Her laughter rippled through drawing rooms like music composed specifically for admiration, her golden curls catching lamplight as though heaven itself conspired to flatter her. She moved through life as one born knowing she would always be welcome, always be wanted, always be first. Lady Edith Rowanwood Harrow understood from girlhood that she would be none of these things. A scar traced pale across her cheekbone where fever had burned too hot one winter, and her gait carried the faint unevenness of a leg that had healed imperfectly. She read where Cecilia danced, tended roses where Cecilia collected hearts, and cultivated a particular brand of dignity that only those who've learned to expect nothing can truly master. Not resentful, not withdrawn, simply present in all the places where eyes did not naturally fall. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. When His Grace, Nathaniel Aldrich Blackwell, Duke of Blackmore, descended upon Sussex with the weight of his title and the coldness of his reputation, the entire county held its breath waiting for the inevitable. Cecilia prepared her most devastating gowns. Lady Honoria Harrow rehearsed introductions with military precision. The assembly rooms buzzed with speculation about when, not if, the Duke would claim the Harrow Rose as his own. Then came the afternoon that fractured every assumption. Beneath an arbor heavy with climbing jasmine, before witnesses who would dine on this story for decades, the Duke stood with his spine rigid and his voice carrying across stunned silence. He looked past the daughter everyone assumed he wanted, fixed his gaze upon the one no gentleman had ever noticed first, and delivered words that struck like thunder in a cloudless sky. Lady Edith, I would be honored if you would permit me to court you. The teacup in Lady Honoria's hand trembled. Cecilia's perfect smile froze, then cracked like porcelain dropped on marble. And Edith, quiet, overlooked Edith, felt the earth shift beneath her feet, though her expression revealed nothing more than careful surprise. In that single moment, beneath spring blossoms that would fall and return again, everything the Harrow family had built upon beauty and expectation began its slow, irreversible collapse. The morning after His Grace's shocking announcement, Edith woke before dawn as she always did, to the particular silence that belonged only to those hours when even servants still dreamed. She dressed without assistance, a skill born of necessity rather than preference, and descended to the library where she knew she would be undisturbed. Cecilia never rose before 10. Their mother would spend the morning in her chambers composing frantic letters to relatives, attempting to explain what could not be explained. And the Duke would not arrive until afternoon, when propriety dictated his visit. Edith had learned to treasure these stolen hours. She settled into the chair near the eastern window where light would eventually spill across her book, and tried not to think about how everything had changed while somehow remaining exactly the same. She was still herself, still the daughter with the uneven step and the face that made people look quickly away. Still the one who understood that being chosen did not necessarily mean being wanted. The Duke had outlined his terms the previous evening with the emotional warmth of a solicitor reviewing contracts. A marriage before autumn's end. Separate chambers. Mutual respect, but no expectations of sentiment. He required an heir eventually, but assured her with chilling courtesy that he would make such requirements as infrequent as possible. You need not concern yourself with affection, Lady Edith, he had said, his voice even and his eyes focused somewhere past her left shoulder. I find I function best without it. She had agreed because women in her position always agreed, and because some small, stubborn part of her preferred a loveless marriage to no marriage at all. At least this way, she would have a purpose, a household, a place that was hers even if the man within it never would be. What she had not known, what she discovered only when she passed the drawing room later that night and heard his voice through the partially open door, was what he truly thought of his decision. Edith Harrow is entirely unremarkable, He was saying to someone, Mr. Oswin Grant, his steward, she realized. That is precisely why she suits me. I have no interest in the complications that accompany beauty or charm. She will not expect declarations or romantic gestures. She will not demand what I cannot give. A pause, then, she is safe. And safety, Grant, is the only thing I require from a wife. Edith stood in the darkened hallway, one hand pressed flat against the cool wall, and absorbed these words the way one absorbs a blow, with silence and the grim acceptance of someone who has been struck before. She did not cry. She returned to her room and sat at her writing desk until the candle burned low, watching shadows pool in corners and understanding with perfect clarity exactly what her life would become. A shield, a convenience, a woman so thoroughly unremarkable that loving her would never be a risk. She blew out the candle and climbed into bed, and if her pillow grew damp in the darkness, there was no one present to witness it. His Grace began visiting with unsettling regularity. He arrived each afternoon precisely at 3, remained for exactly 90 minutes, and departed with the same formal courtesy he'd shown upon arrival. He spoke mostly with Lady Honoria about settlements and arrangements, occasionally with Cecilia when politeness demanded it, and sometimes, increasingly, with Edith herself. These conversations held a strange quality. He did not flirt or compliment. He did not gaze at her with longing or even particular interest. Instead, he asked questions that seemed designed to catalog her as one might catalog household inventory. Do you play the pianoforte? No, Your Grace. My hands lack the necessary dexterity. Do you enjoy dancing? I find it painful after extended periods. What occupies your time, then? I read. I tend the rose gardens. I manage the household accounts when my mother permits it. At this last answer, something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but a flicker of attention, as though she had said something unexpected. You manage accounts? Someone must. My father left certain complications when he died. He studied her for a long moment. I see. That evening, she found him in the garden where she often worked, standing near the bed of white roses she had been attempting to revive after a harsh winter. He still wore his riding coat, and his boots carried traces of the bridle path. You spend considerable time here, he observed, not quite a question. Why did you agree to this marriage? You could have refused. Your mother would have been disappointed, but she could not have forced you. Edith considered her answer carefully, aware that honesty here might be dangerous. Because I am 26, Your Grace. Because my father's debts will not resolve themselves. Because Cecilia will need a dowry when she marries, and our coffers will not stretch to cover both of us. She paused. And because being chosen for practical reasons is still being chosen, which is more than I have ever been before. He turned to face her fully, and in the dim light his expression was unreadable. You believe yourself unchosen. I know myself unchosen. There is a difference between belief and knowledge. Something flickered across his face. Anger, perhaps, or pain. She could not tell which. Then we are matched in our delusions, Lady Edith. I chose you because I believed you would not notice if I failed to love you. Now I wonder if that was the cruelest assumption of all. Before she could respond, he bowed sharply and left, his footsteps quick on the stone, as though fleeing something he had said too much about. Edith remained on the terrace until the cold drove her inside, turning his words over in her mind like stones polished smooth by water, trying to understand what they meant and why they made her chest feel tight with something that was not quite hope, but not quite despair either. The wedding ceremony unfolded in the chapel at Blackmore Hall beneath October light, filtered through ancient stained glass. Edith wore cream silk that had belonged to Nathaniel's mother. A gesture from him that felt more like obligation than sentiment, and carried white roses from her own garden. The vows were spoken, the contract signed, the marriage sealed with a kiss so brief and formal it might have been a handshake. That night, they retired to separate chambers as arranged. Edith did not cry. She had known exactly what this marriage would be, after all. She had agreed to it. She would endure it. What she had not anticipated was how the endurance would feel. The weight of lying alone in an enormous bed while knowing he was doing the same 3 doors away, close enough to call for yet entirely unreachable. They settled into the careful choreography of strangers sharing a household. Breakfast together in silence. Separate pursuits during the day. Dinner with minimal conversation. Evenings spent in the same drawing room. reading books that required no discussion. It was civil, respectful, utterly hollow. And then, 3 weeks after the wedding, Edith woke with a fever that climbed so swiftly Dr. Rowan was summoned before noon. Influenza, he pronounced grimly. She must remain in bed. Keep her warm, but not overheated. Liquids frequently. I shall return tomorrow. Edith heard all this through the cottony distance of illness, her body alternating between burning and shivering, her thoughts scattered like leaves in wind. She was dimly aware of servants moving in and out, of curtains being drawn, of someone pressing cool cloth to her forehead. What she did not expect was to wake in darkness and find Nathaniel sitting beside her bed, still fully dressed, reading by candlelight. "Your Grace," she managed, her voice a rasp. "You should not." "Be quiet, Edith." The use of her first name, soft and firm, startled her into silence. Rest. She slept. Woke. Found him still there. Slept again. This pattern repeated itself for 3 days. Each time she surfaced from fever dreams, he was present, reading to her sometimes, simply sitting others, once brushing damp hair back from her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache more than the illness did. On the 4th day, the fever broke. She woke to gray morning light and found him asleep in the chair, his head tilted at an angle that would surely cause neck pain, dark circles beneath his eyes. She studied him openly for the first time, this man who had married her for safety and then spent 72 hours refusing to leave her bedside. His face in sleep looked younger, less guarded, almost vulnerable. As though sensing her gaze, his eyes opened. They stared at each other across the small distance between bed and chair, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of it. "You stayed," she whispered. "Of course I stayed." His voice was rough with exhaustion. "Did you think I would not? You married me to avoid precisely this sort of complication." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and when he spoke his words carried a weight that made her breath catch. "I am discovering that you are an entirely different category of complication than I anticipated, Lady Edith, and I find I no longer wish to avoid you at all." Before she could respond, Dr. Rowan arrived, and the moment shattered into activity. Examinations and instructions, and Nathaniel being ordered firmly to his own chambers to rest. But later, when she was alone again, Edith touched the spot on her forehead where his fingers had brushed her hair back, and allowed herself to wonder if perhaps being unchosen might not be permanent after all. Recovery came slowly, but with it came changes neither of them acknowledged, yet both seemed to lean into. Nathaniel no longer disappeared after breakfast. He brought her tea without being asked. He insisted she rest in the conservatory where winter sun could reach her, and spent his own afternoons working at the desk he'd moved there, so she would not be alone. They talked more. Not about anything significant at first. The weather, estate matters, a book one or the other was reading. But gradually the conversations deepened, roots finding purchase in soil neither had known was fertile. "Why do you hate music?" she asked one afternoon, watching him deliberately avoid the pianoforte as they passed through the music room. He stopped walking. "I do not hate it. You avoid it religiously. There is a difference." A long pause. Then, "My mother played. She was extraordinarily gifted. After she died, my father had the pianos removed from every room. When I inherited, I brought them back, but I find I cannot." He gestured vaguely. "The sound carries memories I prefer not to revisit." Edith absorbed this quietly. "Then we shall avoid them together, if you like." He looked at her with something that might have been gratitude. "You do not find that cowardly? I find it human. There is no courage in forcing yourself into pain for no purpose." That evening, she discovered a small bundle on the table beside her reading chair, dried lavender tied with string. No note, no explanation, but she understood its meaning. "I see what you do for me. I am trying to do something for you in return." December arrived with frost and shorter days. They began taking walks through the skeletal garden, Edith leaning slightly on his arm, not entirely because of her leg. They shared meals where silence felt comfortable rather than strained. Once, she laughed at something he said, and he stared at her with such intensity she felt heat climb her cheeks. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing. I simply had not heard that sound before." "I laugh occasionally, Your Grace." "Nathaniel," he corrected quietly. "And not with me. You have not." She had no response to that, so she said nothing, but later she practiced his name silently, testing its shape against her tongue. One morning she found him in the greenhouse, awkwardly attempting to stake a climbing rose that had grown unruly. He was making a disaster of it. "You are going to strangle the poor thing," she observed, unable to suppress her smile. "I am trying to help." "You are trying, certainly." She moved to his side, demonstrating the proper technique. "Like this. Gently. You must support without constraining." His hands covered hers, ostensibly to learn the motion, but they remained there longer than instruction required. She felt the warmth of him at her back, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Edith," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her name sound like a question and an answer simultaneously. She turned within the circle of his arms, not fully facing him, but enough to meet his eyes. They were standing close enough that she could see gold flecks in the gray of his irises, close enough to feel the heat radiating from him despite winter's chill. "Yes." Her voice emerged barely above a whisper. He lifted one hand slowly, as though approaching something wild he feared might bolt, and traced the scar on her cheekbone with his thumb. "I need to tell you something." "Then tell me." But before he could speak, Oswin Grant appeared in the doorway with news of a crisis involving flooded tenant fields, and the moment dissolved into duty and practicality. Still, that night as Edith lay in her bed 3 doors away from his, she touched her cheek where his thumb had rested and knew with sudden, fierce certainty that whatever was growing between them was too large to remain unnamed much longer. If you have gotten to this point, please don't leave without subscribing to our channel. Help us reach 5,000 subscribers in 2 weeks. Thank you. The crisis with the flooded fields required Nathaniel to travel to the northern edge of the estate for nearly a week. He departed with visible reluctance, though he masked it behind practical concerns about leaving Edith to manage the household in his absence. "I am quite capable of managing, Your Grace." "Nathaniel," he corrected automatically, then added more quietly, "I know you are capable. That is not what concerns me." "Then what does?" He looked at her for a long moment, jaw working as though physically restraining words. "Finally, I have grown accustomed to your presence. I find its absence inconvenient." It was the closest thing to a declaration he had offered, and they both knew it. While he was gone, Edith discovered exactly how much his presence had become woven into the fabric of her days. The conservatory felt too empty. Tea tasted wrong when there was no one across from her. She caught herself listening for his footsteps before remembering they would not come. Cecilia arrived for a visit Edith had not requested and did not want, accompanied by Lady Honoria, who seemed determined to inspect how thoroughly her overlooked daughter had failed to capture the Duke's heart. "Separate chambers still?" Cecilia asked sweetly over tea, examining her perfect nails. "How very modern of you both. How very intrusive of you to ask." Edith replied with more steel than she'd known she possessed. "I am simply concerned for your happiness, sister dear. It cannot be pleasant, knowing you were chosen only because you would not be any trouble." Cecilia's smile could have cut glass. "Though I suppose that is better than not being chosen at all." "You should leave," Edith said quietly. "Edith." Lady Honoria looked scandalized. "Your sister has traveled all this way to remind me that I am a disappointment. I assure you, Mother, the message has been thoroughly delivered throughout my entire life. I require no refresher." She stood, abandoning her tea, and walked from the room with her spine straight and her limp barely noticeable. A small victory over body that cost her dearly but felt essential. She found herself in the library, breathing hard, pressing her palms against the cool wood of Nathaniel's desk as though it could anchor her. She should not have lost her composure. Should not have revealed how deeply the barbs landed. Should not have. "Lady Edith?" She turned to find Oswin Grant in the doorway, expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Grant, forgive me, I was just—" His Grace sent express instructions that you were to have full authority over household matters in his absence, including the guest list. His tone was mild, but his meaning clear. "Should you wish certain guests to depart early, I would be happy to make the necessary arrangements." Edith stared at him, then felt a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "That would be most helpful, Mr. Grant." "Thank you." "My pleasure, Lady Edith. And if I may say, His Grace speaks very highly of you in private, perhaps more highly than he yet realizes." He withdrew before she could respond, leaving Edith alone with those words and the sudden, fierce hope they kindled. Nathaniel returned 3 days later, arriving just after sunset, covered in road dust and clearly exhausted. Edith heard the commotion in the entrance hall and descended to find him issuing brief instructions to staff. He looked up, caught sight of her on the stairs, and went completely still. "You are home," she said, then felt foolish because obviously he was home. "I am." His eyes never left her face. "Your mother and sister departed? 2 days ago." It seemed the appropriate time for them to leave. "Good." He said it with such firm satisfaction that Edith felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Then, I wish to speak with you. Privately. If you are not too fatigued." "I am not fatigued." "The library, then." "In 10 minutes." He took the stairs 2 at a time, and Edith returned to the library with her heart beating far too quickly for mere conversation. When Nathaniel entered the library, he had changed from his traveling clothes, but his hair was still damp from washing, curling slightly against his collar in a way she had never noticed before. He closed the door, not quite improper since they were married, but unusual enough to make her pulse quicken. "Edith." He stood near the door as though afraid approaching too quickly might frighten her. "I need to speak plainly, and I ask that you hear me fully before responding." "Of course." He drew a breath, released it. "I married you under false pretenses. Not false in the legal sense. The settlements were accurate, the vows sincere, but false in what I told myself about my motivations." Another breath. "I told myself I chose you because you were safe. Because you would not need my heart, therefore I would never risk it. Because loving you would be impossible, and impossibility felt like protection." Edith remained silent, hardly breathing, as he continued. "But the truth I have been avoiding since that first afternoon in the rose garden, is that I chose you precisely because some part of me recognized that you were the only woman who could reach past my defenses. Not through beauty or charm or manipulation, but through simple, devastating authenticity." He moved closer then, 3 steps that brought him within arm's reach. "You existed in my presence without pretense. You did not perform or preen or adjust yourself to suit my preferences. You were simply yourself, entirely yourself, and that terrified me more than any amount of beauty ever could." "Nathaniel," she began, but he shook his head. "Please, let me finish before my courage fails." His hands clenched at his sides. "When I heard myself telling Grant you were unremarkable, I believed it. I convinced myself your value lay in what you would not demand from me. But I was wrong. So profoundly, cruelly wrong." He reached for her hand, taking it gently in both of his. "You are the most remarkable person I have ever encountered. Your intelligence, your resilience, your capacity to exist alongside pain without being destroyed by it. These are not unremarkable qualities. They are extraordinary. And I have been a coward and a fool for taking so long to recognize that." Edith felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "You are not a fool. I am. And worse, I am a man who hurt you through my cowardice." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "When you were ill, and I sat beside your bed, I realized I could not bear the thought of losing you. Not because you are safe or convenient or easy to ignore, but because in these few months you have become essential to my existence in ways I cannot begin to articulate." "Then perhaps you should stop trying to articulate them," she whispered, "and simply show me instead." His eyes widened slightly. Then, moving with careful deliberation, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Not the formal gesture of greeting, but something tender and reverent, his lips lingering against her skin. "I do not know how to love someone properly, Edith. I am badly out of practice at being human rather than dutiful. But if you will permit it, I would like very much to learn. With you. For you." The tears fell then, silent and hot on her cheeks. "You believe me capable of teaching such things?" "I believe you capable of anything." He released her hand only to cup her face, his palms warm against her skin, his thumbs brushing away tears. "You have already taught me that being chosen is not the same as being valued. That quiet strength is still strength. That overlooked does not mean unworthy." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And that I am capable of loving someone even after convincing myself I was not. You love me?" The words emerged broken, disbelieving, desperately, irrevocably, with a completeness that makes mockery of every wall I built to prevent it. Edith made a sound between a laugh and a sob, and then his mouth was on hers, gentle at first, questioning, giving her space to refuse. But she did not refuse. Instead, she rose on her toes, winding her arms around his neck, kissing him back with months of loneliness and longing finally given permission to exist. It was not a perfect kiss. Their noses bumped. She tasted salt from her own tears. His hands trembled slightly against her back. But it was real, messy and honest, and entirely theirs. When they finally parted, breathless and shaken, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I do not deserve you." "Fortunate, then. That deserving has nothing to do with it." She smiled through tears. "We chose each other, Nathaniel. Badly and fearfully at first, perhaps. But we chose each other nonetheless. And now we get to choose again." "Every day? Better this time." "Every day," he agreed, and kissed her again. Softer now, sweeter, tasting of promises they would spend the rest of their lives learning how to keep. Winter deepened into the particular quiet that comes when snow muffles sound, and early darkness makes indoor spaces feel more intimate. But within Blackmore Hall, warmth bloomed in unexpected places. Nathaniel and Edith did not suddenly transform into different people. He remained somewhat awkward with affection, and used to expressing tenderness after years of careful control. She still expected rejection even as she leaned into acceptance. But they learned each other slowly, deliberately, building something sturdy from the ruins of what they had first attempted. He began entering her chamber in the evenings, tentatively at first, as though expecting refusal, to sit by her fire and simply talk. About his childhood before his mother died. About the weight of inheriting a title he'd never wanted. About fears he'd carried so long they'd become part of his skeleton. She told him about growing up invisible. About watching Cecilia collect admirers like flowers while she collected only dismissals. About teaching herself that wanting less meant hurting less, until she had almost forgotten how to want anything at all. "You want now, though," he observed one night, tracing the scar on her cheek with familiar gentleness. "I see it when you look at me. I am terrified by how much I want," she admitted. "By how much there is to lose. Then we shall be terrified together. I find fear much more bearable when shared." They kissed often now, in corridors and conservatories, over breakfast and before sleep, sometimes simply because they were in the same room and proximity felt insufficient. Each kiss was different, some playful, others desperate, many tender enough to ache. Once, after a particularly thorough session in the library that left them both disheveled and breathless, Edith laughed against his mouth. "We are deplorable at maintaining dignity. I am beginning to suspect dignity is overrated." He kissed her nose, her forehead, the corners of her eyes. "You have ruined me for propriety, Lady Blackwell." "Good," she said firmly, and pulled him back down. They moved her belongings into his chamber on a gray January afternoon, both pretending it was practical rather than monumental. That night, curled together in the darkness with his arm around her waist and her head on his chest, Edith whispered, "Are you certain this is what you want? I am still the same woman you called unremarkable." "No," he said into her hair. "You are the woman I was too blind to see properly. There is a considerable difference." He tightened his hold. "And yes, Edith, I have never been more certain of anything." Spring came early that year. The roses bloomed with unusual vigor, and Edith spent hours in the garden while Nathaniel worked nearby, content to exist in parallel. Sometimes he would set down whatever he was doing and simply watch her, hands in the soil, face peaceful, entirely absorbed in the work of making things grow. One such afternoon, she caught him staring. "What are you thinking?" "That I understand now why you find this satisfying." He gestured to the beds surrounding them. "You give things space to become what they already are, underneath. You do not try to force them into different shapes. Is there a reason that observation makes you look so serious?" He crossed to her, kneeling in the dirt heedless of his trousers. "Because you did the same for me. You did not try to change me or fix me or demand I be different than I was. You simply existed alongside me until I remembered how to exist properly myself." Edith set down her pruning shears and framed his face with her hands, dirt-streaked and gentle. "We did that for each other, I think. You taught me I was worth noticing. I taught you that being noticed was not inherently dangerous. We are even. We are married," he corrected, smiling in the particular way he only smiled at her, soft and unguarded and utterly hers, which is far better than even. That evening they walked through Rosefell Village together, and Edith noticed how differently people looked at her now, not with pity or dismissal, but with respect. Lady Blackwell, they called her. The Duchess who had gentled a cold duke. The overlooked girl who had become essential. But titles and reputation meant less than they once had. What mattered was the man whose hand held hers as they walked. The life they were building from honesty and effort, and the particular kind of love that grew best in quiet places, given time and attention. Happy? Nathaniel asked as they turned toward home, the hall visible on the hill above them. Yes, Edith said simply, and meant it with a completeness that would have seemed impossible mere months ago. They climbed the hill together as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Two people who had chosen each other badly at first, and then, with patience and courage, learned to choose each other well. The overlooked sister was overlooked no longer. By the time spring surrendered to summer's warmth, the transformation of Blackmore Hall had become the subject of considerable speculation throughout Sussex and beyond. The Duke, who had been carved from ice and duty, now smiled openly at his wife across dinner tables. The woman who had spent 26 years practicing invisibility now moved through rooms with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she was seen. But the change ran deeper than society's observations could capture. One morning in late June, Edith woke to find Nathaniel already dressed, standing at the window overlooking the gardens with an expression she could not immediately decipher. She rose, wrapping herself in her dressing gown, and crossed to stand beside him. "You are troubled," she observed, slipping her hand into his. He squeezed her fingers, but did not look away from the view. "I received a letter from Cecilia yesterday." Edith stiffened involuntarily. Communications from her sister had been mercifully rare since the wedding, brief, formal notes acknowledging holidays, and little else. What did she want? "She is engaged. To Lord Tobias Whitcomb. She wished to inform us, and to—" He paused, jaw working. "She apologized. To you. For her cruelty during our courtship." "I see." Edith processed this quietly. "And how do you feel about that?" "I feel that apologies are only meaningful when accompanied by changed behavior, and I have no evidence yet that hers has changed." He turned to face her fully, both hands capturing hers now. "But more than that, I feel grateful beyond measure that she showed her true nature before I was fool enough to pursue her. Because it meant I turned toward you instead. You make it sound as though fate intervened. Perhaps it did. Or perhaps I simply recognized, however unconsciously, that what I truly needed was not someone who would dazzle me, but someone who would know me." He lifted her hands to his lips. "Someone who would see past the title and the coldness I wrapped around myself, and understand that underneath it all was simply a man who had forgotten how to be vulnerable." Edith felt the familiar sting of tears, happy ones now, though months ago she would not have believed such things existed. "You give me far too much credit." "Impossible. I could spend our entire marriage giving you credit and still fall short of what you deserve." They stood together in the morning light, and Edith marveled at how thoroughly her life had been rewritten. The girl who had accepted a loveless marriage because it was better than nothing had become a woman who woke each day knowing she was cherished. The Duke who had proposed to avoid his heart had become a man who led with it. "We should respond to her letter," Edith said eventually. "With grace, if we can manage it. You are far better at grace than I am. Then fortunate that we can practice together." That afternoon, they composed the response jointly, Edith writing while Nathaniel paced and dictated, both of them negotiating the delicate balance between civility and boundary setting. When they finished, Nathaniel read it over her shoulder, his chin resting lightly on her head. "You are far more generous than she deserves," he murmured against her hair. "Perhaps, but generosity costs me nothing now. I have everything I need." He turned her chair so she faced him, then knelt before her as he had in the garden months ago, but this time without hesitation, without fear, with only the certainty of a man who knew exactly what he held. "Edith Rowanwood Blackwell," he said solemnly, though his eyes were warm. "I married you because I was afraid. I fell in love with you because you made fear irrelevant. And I wake each morning grateful beyond words that you were patient enough to wait for me to understand the difference." She cupped his face, thumbs tracing the sharp lines of his cheekbones. "I married you because I thought it was the best I could hope for. I fell in love with you because you proved hope insufficient. What we have is so much larger than anything I dared imagine. Then we are both fools who stumbled into wisdom." "The very best kind of fools," she agreed, and kissed him there in the study with afternoon sun spilling across the floor and the future stretching before them like an unwritten book, theirs to fill however they chose. 1 year after the Duke of Blackmore shocked Sussex by choosing the overlooked sister, spring returned to Harrow House. But Edith did not see it. She was at Blackmore Hall, kneeling in her own garden now. Far grander than her mother's, though she still preferred the small beds near the conservatory, where she could work in relative solitude. Her hands were deep in rich soil, coaxing bulbs into position, when she heard familiar footsteps on the gravel path. Should you be doing that? Nathaniel's voice carried equal parts amusement and concern. She glanced up at him, shielding her eyes against the sun. Should I be gardening? I have been gardening since I could walk. You know perfectly well what I mean. He crouched beside her, one hand coming to rest with gentle possessiveness on the barely visible swell of her abdomen. Dr. Rowan said you should avoid strain. Dr. Rowan says many things. I am with a child, not made of spun glass. Nevertheless, he took the trowel from her hand with playful firmness. I will finish this. You will sit on that bench and supervise. You are terrible at planting bulbs. Then you will have ample opportunity to criticize my technique while remaining safely seated. She wanted to argue. Instead, she found herself laughing, still surprised, even now, by how easily joy came to her. She moved to the bench and watched him work with more enthusiasm than skill, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, dirt accumulating on his hands with every misplaced bulb. You are planting them upside down, she observed. I am experimenting with alternative methods. They will not grow upside down, Nathaniel. You do not know that. Perhaps they are revolutionary bulbs. Perhaps you should let me finish. Absolutely not. You hired me for this task. I intend to see it through with dignity. He paused, examined his work, then sighed. They are upside down, are they not? Comprehensively. He sat back on his heels, looking at her with such unguarded affection that her breath caught. How did I ever convince myself you were unremarkable? Fear makes us stupid. You taught me that. Then I taught you something true, at least. He abandoned the bulbs and came to sit beside her on the bench, taking her hand in his dirt-stained one. Are you happy, Edith? Truly. She leaned into him, her head finding its familiar place against his shoulder. I am married to a man who plants bulbs upside down because he does not want me to strain myself. I wake each morning knowing I am seen and valued. I am growing a child who will know from birth that they are wanted. She paused. Yes, Nathaniel. I am truly happy. Are you? I am married to the most extraordinary woman in England, who somehow convinced herself for years that she was ordinary. I have learned that love is not something to fear, but something to tend carefully, like roses in a garden. And I get to spend the rest of my life proving to you that being chosen last was the greatest gift fate ever gave me. Because it meant I was choosing with wisdom rather than impulse. He kissed her temple, soft and lingering. So yes, my darling, overlooked no longer wife. I am profoundly, impossibly happy. They sat together in the spring sunshine, two people who had married for all the wrong reasons and then, through patience and courage and the particular grace that comes from refusing to accept less than they deserved, built something far more beautiful than either had imagined possible. In the village, they still told the story of the Duke who rejected the beautiful sister and chose the one most would overlook. But the ending had changed. It was no longer a tale of settling or compromise or accepting what one could get. It had become a story about a woman who taught herself to want again and a man who learned that the safest choice was no choice at all, that real love required risk and vulnerability and the courage to be known completely. It had become a story about two people who were brave enough to choose each other poorly at first, and then wise enough to choose each other well every single day after. And in the garden at Blackmore Hall, where roses bloomed with unusual vigor and bulbs were planted upside down with the best of intentions, Lady Edith Blackwell rested her hand over her growing child and understood with perfect clarity that being overlooked had never been her tragedy. It had been her prologue. The real story, the one worth telling, had begun the moment someone finally looked closely enough to see her, and then decided she was worth everything. If Edith and Nathaniel's story just made you feel something, if you're sitting there wishing your love story hit this hard, then you better subscribe right now because I'm not writing these for ghosts. Comment below and tell me, Team Edith or Team Cecilia? If you say Cecilia, we need to talk about your standards. Like this if you believe the overlooked ones deserve their moment. If you don't, The algorithm buries this, and nobody else gets to cry happy tears over a duke who plants bulbs upside down. Your girl just spent hours crafting a Victorian romance that slaps different. The least you can do is hit 3 buttons. Subscribe, comment, like. Until next time, take care of yourself. Thank you.